the estrogen dominance. And why I want to make this abundantly clear is that not everybody experiences too much estrogen. It can also be a deficiency in progesterone that can be contributing to this perceived estrogen dominance. And this is very common in early or even mid perimenopause, so that time before you actively stop cycling. But why women can experience estrogen dominant type hormonal patterns is because, as I expressed.
Welcome to The Third Opinion, presented by Full Circle Health. Join us each week as we delve into the world of integrative and functional medicine through discussions, interviews, lecture series, and more. Our experts have been on both sides of the Western medical system and understand the frustrations associated with getting real answers about all of the available treatment options. Well, we are here to give you the answers. We'll take the time to break down the latest holistic and integrative medical procedures, supplements, and discoveries to help you better understand your body on a molecular level. Please keep in mind, this podcast was created for educational purposes only and should never be used to take place of a medical diagnosis or treatment. As always, make sure to take the time to submit any questions or comments you may have about today's show so we can give you the answers you need. Now, let's get healthy.
Hello, everybody. The doc is in, and I am very excited to start part 2 of our series when it comes to hormones. So for anybody that might have missed the last podcast and would like to just reminisce, I am going to dive in a lot deeper today, more so into functional hormonal patterns as well as naturopathic support. But in our last episode, we covered what's happening. Today, we're decoding patterns. Hormones don't just decline. The shift in patterns is unique to each woman. And that's why functional and naturopathic approaches are always an amazing process, support, and tool for us women. But at the same instance, today we're going to talk about some patterns. I don't want anybody to go out there and diagnose themselves and put themselves within a category, because it is very challenging to do these podcasts just solely because everybody's an individual. So yes, I want everybody to have a little bit of awareness when it comes to this topic, but I can't stress enough that there is so much individual depth per each person. So on our last episode, we talked about not treating menopause because it's not a disease, but through our naturopathic and functional approaches, we're going to actually identify the patterns of imbalance. So I'm excited. Let's dive in. As I expressed, we're going to talk in maybe a little bit faster. So for anybody that might be interested to just slow it down or re-listen, that's the beauty of podcast as opposed to radio, which is our, tried and true here with Third Opinion. But with podcast, you can re-listen and, maybe you're pitter-pattering, doing something else while you're tuning into the Third Opinion. But at the same instance, this is a good opportunity to kind of get some perspective and maybe share with those that you feel like might be struggling with some of these concerns. So one of the core functional hormonal patterns that we are going to discuss in depth here today is the estrogen dominance. And why I want to make this abundantly clear is that not everybody experiences too much estrogen. It can also be a deficiency in progesterone that can be contributing to this perceived estrogen dominance. And this is very common in early or even mid perimenopause, so that time before you actively stop cycling. But why women can experience estrogen dominant type hormonal patterns is because, as I expressed, progesterone drops first. So your estrogen might be normal, but your progesterone is dipping, and that can make your body perceive an estrogen dominant scenario. And oftentimes, maybe we're missing ovulation. So what we call anovulatory cycles. Basically, we're not dropping an egg on that cycle, and that can really confuse and cause that estrogen dominance, as well as impaired detoxification. So if your liver, if your gut are stressed, that highly influences how your estrogen is cleared and processed through the body, as well as genetic factors. Some of us clear estrogens faster and better than others, so we have to be a lot more mindful when it comes to environmental toxins, whichever that can be, that mimic estrogen pathways. We call those xenoestrogens and xenobiotics. Those are things that are coming through the environment, plastics, things that ultimately influence and impact our estrogen clearance and balance within our system. So as well as your adipose tissue contribution. A lot of our estrogen is held within our fat cells. So if some of us unfortunately are retaining a little bit more fat tissue, we tend to be a little bit more estrogen dominant due to where it's more predominantly found. So, what are some symptoms that are associated with estrogen dominance? Well, you can have heavier periods, you can experience more breast tenderness, irritability, and weight gain, specifically in our hips and our thighs. But the biggest thing I want to make clear is that it might not be too much estrogen. It can be the imbalance estrogen signaling that's contributing to this. As I expressed, if there's not a balance between all the hormones, if we're not actively menstruating and cycling appropriately, if we're not detoxing well, and if we're storing a lot of our fat and our estrogen it lies there as well. Another key hormonal pattern is progesterone deficiency. So, specifically, this happens when we stop ovulating. So, if you stop ovulating, there's a loss of ovulation is equivalent to a loss of progesterone. So, a lot of us can experience anxiety, poor sleep, shorter menstrual cycles. So, that means the day one that you start bleeding up to the next day you start bleeding, roughly on average, are 28 to 30 days. But if you start noticing 27, 26, 25, those are clear note signs that the progesterone is deficient. And you might be noticing that you're a little bit having difficulty falling asleep. Things like that can be another big sign. But realistically, why progesterone is such a key point and why patients can experience some anxiety factors like that is because progesterone and GABA, which is that feel good neurotransmitter that has a calming effect, when that progesterone starts to dip, so does our GABA. And so that's very, very important for us as women to understand because a lot of times the Western model goes and places us on anti-anxiolytics, such as GABAergic drugs, without necessarily recognizing that the hormones could be driving or contributing to that imbalance. Not to say that there's not benefit and maybe a short term support with any of those type prescriptive mental, emotional, supportive strategies. It's just that we really want to understand why. And as I expressed, progesterone deficiency can be a leading cause of estrogen dominance. And so it's all kind of connected. And so this is truly where women with progesterone deficiency start to say, I don't feel like myself. Well, yeah. And a lot of it is because one of your main hormones that ultimately differs us from males, because yes, males have testosterone, progesterone, and estrogen, but it's the forms and the amounts that circulate. And so as women, our progesterone is really the key hormone that sets us apart because even men have estrogen, obviously way less amounts, but still it is very critical for us as women to advocate for ourselves when we're not feeling like ourselves and not just looking for a pill for this challenge, more so diving in deeper and understanding like, why are my PMS symptoms getting worse? Why am I not able to sleep? Why are little things setting me off? Another core functional pattern that we see with hormonal challenges is cortisol dysregulation. And realistically, this is such a hidden driver to so many of our patients. More so because I want to extend this and further out. Your hormones all kind of work together. So you have your thyroid, your sex hormones, your adrenals. It's kind of like a triangle. But how they work together is actually through our endocrine system, which is a more network of system of glands. Some of those glands specifically are present within our brain, our hypothalamus, our pituitary. And this is truly where we start seeing that cortisol dysregulation is when we get something called hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis almost overdrive. It's almost like your adrenal glands, which are those little glands that sit over your kidneys that produce hormones in response to stress, infection, inflammation, they start to steer the ship and start telling that little hypothalamus and pituitary, like, no, you're listening to me. Okay, you're not going to talk to the thyroid the same way. You're not going to talk to the ovaries the same way. There's no hormones circulating. This person's not working out. They just need to get going. And that's really where we start seeing some of those patterns that we discussed in our previous podcast and even through so many of our social media platforms. But when you start experiencing being wired but tired. It's literally like you just want to crash out all day long, but your brain won't shut off. You're waking up in the nighttime. There is a time frame that is more associated with cortisol dysregulation. And that is that 2 to 4, which through the traditional Chinese medicine lens, each organ and meridian has a time within its clock, which one meridian is more bioactive. And that 1 to 3 a.m. is your liver, and your 3 to 5 is your lung. And so oftentimes that has a lot to do with detoxification patterns. So if you're noticing that the body is waking up and it's like, okay, it's middle of the night, other things are energy crashes. And I see that so often in especially us women when we're trying to lose that belly fat that we're storing up, and we start to say, okay, I'm not going to eat as often. I'm going to do intermittent fasting. And, you know, what ends up happening is our blood sugar crashes and our cortisol drives up. So we're actually making it worse. But cortisol is such a stealing little brat. Oh my gosh, it steals everything from your body, like your sex hormone balance. Basically, your body is driven to survive. And so how you regulate it is so critical because it wants to support you. So if you're saying, I have to get up, I have to do this, then the body just tries to adapt and shift given those circumstances. So you have to change the environment around you to the best that you can to really shift this cortisol pattern because it's coming, ladies. So realistically, even now in the 30s, which is why I personally feel like this is your time to really start advocating, getting a good lay of the land for your hormone balance, but also deciding like, how am I going to support myself so that that isn't me? Because these patterns are out there because we're seeing them time and time and again. So I want to be the generation that learns about the patterns and starts to try to differ and support it differently, right? So if you don't regulate cortisol, nothing else sticks. And so that's oftentimes when I try to get patients to sleep, try to repair and heal those adrenal glands from being on overdrive for so long. So that is our third functional hormonal pattern that we see and commonly note. Our fourth is insulin resistance. And insulin resistance happens in so many of us and maybe unknowingly, okay? But typically we start noticing things like you feel tired after you eat, you're noticing kind of crazy cravings in which they don't feel satisfied and it's almost like you finish eating and you're thinking about your next one, as well as stubborn weight gain. So the body just starts storing fat, and it's very similar to cortisol dysregulation because cortisol and insulin have an inverse relationship. What that means is when cortisol is out in the bloodstream, insulin can't come out. And so if insulin can't come out, sugar stays out, creating havoc and not necessarily being stored or utilized for later use. So the body just keeps trying to thrive off of free circulating sugar all the time because it's feeling this perception of go, 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 go mode. And insulin resistance gets worse during this perimenopause and menopausal time due to the estrogen fluctuations. And it worsens in also with muscle loss. Some of us stop being active or are noting they're not as active and not depositing as much muscle mass tissue as if when they had circulating high testosterone values, but also sleep disruption. When you're not sleeping, your cortisol goes up. So it's kind of like a vicious cycle. And really, this insulin resistance pattern is so often misdiagnosed as just aging metabolism. Oh, you're just getting older. It's like, no, we're experiencing insulin resistance because we're skipping meals. We're not exercising. We're not sleeping. I mean, the body starts to basically go into store mode, throws off your cortisol, which then throws off your androgens, like your testosterone and your estrogen. And really, the androgen shifts, which is our fifth pattern here when we talk about the functional patterns that I tend to see and note when it comes to hormonal shifts and fluctuations, androgen shifts really don't get enough recognition. So a lot of women can start experiencing acne. And it's like, oh my gosh, I'm in my 50s. Why am I getting pimples or hair thinning? So it's like, okay, I'm losing hair on my head, but I'm gaining facial hair down here. And it's like, what's going on? But also that low motivation. So really, this is when we start noticing when your testosterone starts to lessen and be stored in a different light. So there is a 5 beta and a 5 alpha testosterone. The 5 alpha tends to be more androgen dominant, which tends to be how we metabolize our androgens, is more common to experience some of these hair thinning, acne, and low motivation. But, you know, a lot of people can notice that's like the first sign. And then they start seeing low libido and muscle loss and they get kind of skinny fat. And it's like, it's a whole process. And so really it's almost like we get this excess in early perimenopause where we see all these androgens circulating, causing all these issues. The body starts storing it, and then we get a crash. And I can confidently tell you at the later parts of some of our series here today, we're going to be talking about hormone replacement therapy. Our next podcast, I'm going to have Daniel Lyons on and talking about topical hormone replacement and the benefits that may be doing them more naturally. But I see so many women getting pellets insertions, which I'm not to discredit, but we don't do as well with that, ladies, because our body pulls it up so fast and then we start to have drops and crashes. So I always try to support the person from the inside to make sure that even if we go and visit that strategy of hormone replacement therapy, let's say pellets or topicals or whichever, that the liver and the gut are ready, that the adrenals are not going to shuttle and steal some of those resources, that we're clearing those hormones down the safe and correct pathways. So we're not going towards cancer pathways with our estrogens. So we're not storing our testosterone with our 5 alpha. So proper testing, like foundational health needs to be done in order for these hormones to really be effective. And that's what I hate the most is that, patients take that leap of faith to get on hormone replacement therapy and expect all their relief and symptoms to get better. And maybe it's short lived. They get a little bit of relief and then they're like, oh my gosh, this is the rest of my life. And it's almost like, yeah, because you skipped 5 steps. You know what I mean? So now let's talk a little bit about how those 5 patterns, which we just discussed, we talked about estrogen dominance, progesterone deficiency, cortisol dysregulation, insulin resistance, and androgen shifts, that kind of jump and drop. So when oftentimes this is why women can feel so confused. They're like, "Oh my gosh, I'm all of these, right? I'm experiencing one imbalance is very rare. Usually it's estrogen dominance with cortisol dysregulation or insulin resistance and low progesterone." So this is why one supplement doesn't fix everything. So when you read online and a lady's like, "Oh, I started taking this maca root or something," and then you try it and you're like, "It didn't work for me." Well, that's because everybody's an individual and rarely does the body have one pattern. And through that naturopathic approach, we try to support the hierarchy. Like, what is going to be the biggest bang for our buck? What are something that we can focus on so that we can kind of build on our protocols and treatments together to really get the body into what I would consider a domino effect. It's like you started and then everything falls into place as it should. So now we are going to kind of shift gears a little bit. We talked a little bit about the patterns. We talked about how individuals can experience some of those pattern stackings. And I almost feel like they want us women to be confused. And, we all hear our friends, our family, for me, it's my patients talking about how terrible menopause is. And I want to kind of reframe that mindset when it comes to menopause as almost an opportunity. It's a test. It's literally showing you what's happening in your body and how easy that transition can be for you. So we have to kind of, as women, rally to try to get the right and appropriate testing and just try to change the pattern of what we're seeing from the generations prior and saying everything is terrible and aspects like that. So let's talk a little bit about the naturopathic approaches to some of these patterns that we're seeing. So, with estrogen dominance, as I expressed, this can be a reflection of not having enough progesterone to offset it. Some of our genetic, as well as some of our liver and gut aspects can influence. So, some of the things that I like to focus when I support a lot of my women and my patients is that you don't just make hormones, okay? You have to kind of bring it out further. So, all of our hormones are processed in our liver, and ideally, you need a good quality, healthy liver as well as a healthy fat to kind of kickstart that process and allow your body to make your hormones and your sex hormones. So, but not only do you process and make them in the gut or the liver, they are metabolized in the gut. So, your liver, how you detox your estrogens is very, very critical and important in terms of estrogen dominance scenarios and how to support a female that might be experiencing some of those symptoms of estrogen dominance is you start at the liver. You see, okay, how are they clearing? How are they methylating? How are they, what is their preconceived patterns that maybe are genetically attributed to them? There's gene SNPs like the CYP1B1 there are so many others that influence that liver clearance and maybe how to best support you with estrogen clearance. Because even if you wanted to visit natural or prescriptive options for hormones, safety is our highest priority. So, starting at the liver before even visiting any of those strategies or supporting your liver during your hormonal replacement journey is very critical. But there is this new up and finding research coming out about called estrobolome, which is basically your gut microbiome and how much that influences your estrogen dominance. So there are different microbes and strains in your gut that have a higher affinity to estrogen and can either retain it or help you clear it. So having a good, healthy, diverse microbiome makes it so critical in terms of hormonal balance because all of your hormones are processed in your gut. And so if you don't have the right guys to clear out the right hormones, then you're already setting yourself up for not necessarily having the best success. And I see this so commonly, you guys, that women are not getting enough sources of absorbable fiber. As I expressed previously, a lot of our estrogen is stored in fat cells. Well, oftentimes, if we're trying to help support healthy fat excretion and elimination, fiber, which is a natural quote unquote binder, it helps your body kind of globble up that fat so we can poop it out. But also, if you're not actively pooping, that is a huge sign. Just like a baby, food goes in, food goes out. Okay. I have a puppy right now, so I'm living it, right? It's like I feed it 15 minutes later, goes poop, right? And that's a healthy gut and elimination. And there's a lot of fiber in her kibble, right? But at the same instance, we need to be supporting our fiber intake with things like cruciferous vegetables. So eating things like broccoli, kale, cabbage, cauliflower, spinach, Brussels sprouts. I mean, those are so foundational and critical. And maybe you're not in a place where you want to eat a lot of raw roughage and salads. That's fine. You can get cruciferous vegetables through supplementation. You can cook them down and other sources, blend them up, steam them, cook them. I always advocate for that as opposed to raw, just so that, especially if you're new to introducing some of these higher fiber sources, it minimizes the bloating. It helps your body process them. But also, some of us, unfortunately, due to some thyroid dysregulation, don't want to eat a lot of raw cruciferous vegetables. So, really trying to cook them up and finding the best way that you like it, right? I mean, for me, I like putting spinach in my egg omelet. I like, kind of coming up with creative ways to get these in. Okay. But there are also supplementation strategies that are, in my opinion, a lot more potent because unfortunately, so much of our soil is being depleted. So we don't have as many minerals. So we're not really getting as much out of those greens as maybe what we'd hoped. But through the science, which I love so much about pharmaceuticals and what I call, nutraceuticals, is so important because they pull out the little extracts. So, like, we've found that there is sulforaphanes, which are compounds directly found in broccoli seed sprout extracts, which is part of those cruciferous vegetables family. Well, that sulforaphane helps your body with detoxification, specifically within the estrogen metabolism realm. So, and, even keynotes like DIM, indole 3 carbinol, those type compounds that maybe you've heard of through your, process of learning and et cetera. But those are found within cruciferous vegetables. So you don't always have to take a supplement. You can try to really adjust and modify your diet accordingly. Calcium D-glucarate is also a compound that's naturally occurring and found in a lot of those cruciferous vegetables, but truly that alone can really help upregulate your clearance. So it's not only in a lot of our women formulas, but also our male formulas to try to help with what we call aromatization. So blocking that conversion from testosterone to estrogen. Flax seeds, ladies, flax seeds is a natural source of phytoestrogens, which is basically a plant-based estrogen. But if you are experiencing estrogen dominance, you want to try to balance that estrogen. And so flax seeds are a wonderful source of fiber. They support obviously good quality, healthy elimination, but they also kind of balance our estrogen within our system. And in the context of supporting the gut microbiome, those liver detox pathways, and really supporting your body's ability to create bile and gather that fat and poop it out, whatever that might be, bitters. So there are a lot of herbal bitters like gentian and amongst others, but there are bitters even through our food, like arugula. That's a cruciferous vegetable, but it's also a bitter. Dandelion greens, whichever that might be. Eating some of those things before your meals helps kickstart the juices to help properly support digestion, but also helps with your balance between your healthy fat metabolism. And it's a prebiotic, you guys. It's feeding a lot of your beneficial flora to keep your estrobolome, your microbiome specific for estrogen metabolism, healthy and on point. So that was a little bit about some naturopathic approaches to estrogen dominance. So those cruciferous vegetables, the flax seeds, the calcium D-glucarate, the bitters, but progesterone deficiency. So realistically, progesterone deficiency, what oftentimes I see is due to cortisol dysregulation. It's almost like the body stops making progesterone. It shuttles all of its resources to your adrenals. So that's where I typically like to start. So I really talk to patients and individuals about reducing the over exercising. You gotta get some sense of calm and normalcy and balance within your system, almost like retraining your nervous system like you were a baby. Like, do you make your baby go out and work hard? No, you say, okay, play a little bit. Okay, happy connection, go to sleep again. You know what I mean? So we do have to kind of get the body into a sense of normalcy, routine, and state. So reducing the over exercising, but also stabilizing the blood sugar. It's so frustrating for so many of my patients to present to me and I'm talking to them about, okay, you need to eat every 2, 3 hours. I'm like, doc, I'm gaining weight. How are you telling me to eat more? And I'm like, at this point in the game, your body is in such fight or flight mode that it's not recognizing the ways to calm and get out of this like not pain, but get out of this functional hormonal pattern of progesterone deficiency. It's almost like we're shuttling all our resources to the adrenals. If we can start saying, hey, we have access to good food, to rest, to water, the body starts to take a breath and starts to say, okay, we can slow down. Other aspects is that if you are a menstruating and actively cycling female, then supporting ovulation is a key piece in that progesterone deficiency. It's almost like allowing your body to have that egg drop efficiently helps your body then build that progesterone and allow it to build over that ideal 14-day course, as opposed to so many of us get a buildup of 5 days and we get a minimal bleed or a very not so amazing bleed. So we might not have the bright red blood. We might have like brown and spotting, and then we get a good day of bleeding. Those signs, like if you're not talking to your OBGYN or your doctor about the quality, the consistency, the timing of your cycles, then I'm sorry for you because, I can tell you working with the Western realm, they don't ask those questions. It's almost like I have to feed them that information in order for them to know what's going on with me as opposed to like, why don't you care? Like that blows my mind. I know, I'm sorry, but it's just like for me, when I engage with my patients, I am like so into it. I'm so invested because I can only just imagine what's happening in your body from a cellular level and then seeing it objectively through the functional lens. I mean, it's invigorating because I get to provide clarity and answers and guidance and talking with their patients about their body. Just that alone, when they can discuss some of their symptoms out loud instead of letting our algorithms on social media dictate it. I mean, it's so like validating. It's so like, okay, thank you. I made sense to me now. So supporting ovulation whenever that's possible is a key piece with progesterone support, calming that nervous system, but there are some strategies in order to do so. So a lot of times magnesium is honestly such a foundational piece, but magnesium, vitamin D, and calcium all kind of work together. So it's very critical to kind of get all of those values as well in order for us to really see how to supplement, what form, what dosage, because there are variable forms of magnesium. But more so specifically, what I tend to note most beneficial for this progesterone deficiency is the magnesium glycinate, which is kind of more that calming. It has the glycine compound associated with that magnesium. So it helps as a calming neurotransmitter, which, as we express, progesterone and GABA are very synergized. So we want to kind of give that body a little bit of calm. Other vitamins, it's very critical to support methylation, similarly to what we expressed with the estrogen dominant scenario, like having B12 and folate in the appropriate methylated forms for your genetic predisposition. But which is a cofactor within methylation, is very critical when it comes to progesterone deficiency. So oftentimes B6 is in a lot of female formulas, especially when it comes to ovulatory support. And then we have herbs, Vitex, also known as chaste berry, which is such an amazing berry. I mean, and first off, the fact that you can have the berry, be excited. It's not a root, it's not a leaf. Anytime there's a berry in the word, I'm like, ooh, because you should taste some of the tinctures and herbs that I've had throughout my naturopathic education. But the chaste berry is so critical because it has a calming effect. So it does support that GABAergic aspect of things, but it really works on what we call the hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis. So it helps your body kind of talk to those ovaries so that we are supporting that ovulation and supporting that beautiful estrogen build. Other strategies that I discuss with my patients, it's more like a diet lifestyle, is something called seed cycling. And oh my gosh, seed cycling is such a hippy dippy thing. And a lot of people are like, what? And I'm like, bear with me. But seed cycling is incorporating different seeds at different times of your menstrual cycle in order to support that hormonal presentation during whichever time. So, like our flax seeds, our pumpkin seeds, they support our estrogen and our testosterone, while our sesame seeds and sunflower seeds help support our progesterone, which is our second half of our menstrual cycle. And so when I work with patients, I guide them. How do we introduce this? What form? What dosage? All of that. And I find that seamlessly incorporating and creating a kind of rhythm and flow, and that's really what the body is seeking, is some type of routine, some type of rhythm. And so even pulling yourself off of these hormonal type functional patterns, kind of think to yourself, like, what is my routine? What do I really like prioritize in my day? So seed cycling is an old wives' best and most effective way to kind of stabilize and support those hormones. So now let's talk about cortisol regulation, which truly is such a foundational first step for me, okay, when I'm supporting my patients, because you can see it all the time. But I always express that even supplementation, like beautiful adaptogenic herbs like ashwagandha and rhodiola, which are oftentimes recommended with that cortisol regulation, they are not going to override a dysregulated lifestyle. So if you don't have a structure and a plan within your day of, okay, I wake up at this time, I eat at this time. The body likes routine. And like I expressed, I'm over here raising a puppy. I've raised two kids. It ties into even that. Like, why does our life as we get older become more dysregulated when we have actually more control? It's because of the surrounding circumstances, the people we associate with ourselves with, the work we're doing, the way we speak to ourselves. Oh my gosh, right? The list goes on and on about how, unfortunately, our body's being dysregulated from our core foundational. So I really try to talk to patients about being present within the moment. Maybe we need to explore breath work, Pilates, yoga, vagal toning. So loud singing, gargling, supporting your body's ability to rest and digest. So not only are those adaptogenic herbs very profound and supportive, I tend to advocate more so for the herbal compounds as well as some of the glandular sources. So actually getting bovine extracts of these glands like our adrenals. But with that, I want to express and extend one kind of like caution. A lot of patients, they start to get within the adaptogenic herbs and nutrients and come across a lot of functional mushrooms, which I love functional mushrooms. I just want to extend the fact that there is a time and a place for functional mushrooms, solely because if your gut microbiome and our estrobolome and those type things are thrown off, then adding a lot of fungus to the system, you're not going to really gather all the benefits and the good quality properties, because the body is still in like high alert and it's just going to perceive that as a fungus. It's going to perceive it as an outdoor entity that is creating more stress and harm on our body. So it does matter which herb, what nutrient, at what time. And another big thing that I see even on my social media is electrolytes. Oh, well, there are good natural sources of electrolytes, even just pink Himalayan salt in a lemon wedge or coconut water. Like those are natural electrolytes that you can gather through your food, as well as obviously there are electrolyte sachets supportive, but I try to advocate for like adrenal cocktails, which is coconut water or mineral water with lemon juice and a dash of pink Himalayan salt. That really helps feed and support your adrenals because they thrive on minerals as well as vitamin C. So It's so foundational, you guys, to have this cortisol regulated so that we can balance that progesterone, which then can offset that estrogen. So it all kind of ties together, right? So sleep timing. So if you're not, like I said, establishing a good, healthy sleep routine, waking up, getting that morning sunlight, you really got to get your nervous system up and running and actively like engaged to what that rhythm and routine looks like during your day. And so, obviously through the functional lens, we're able to gather testing such as your cortisol rhythm throughout the day and basically see like, okay, what's a typical rhythm and flow for you? And then discuss the introduction of maybe some of these hormones, adaptogens, whichever you might need to support your body through that pattern. Okay. So our other scenario is our insulin resistance. So I can't stress enough that meal timing and meal combining strategies are so critical when it comes to insulin resistance. So I try to talk to patients about, okay, if you sit down and eat salmon, sweet potato, broccoli, well, it's going to be very critical for you to start with the protein source and before you eat the other entities within that meal, because we are trying to retrain our body from using glucose as fuel and trying to replenish and restore some of our muscle capabilities. So protein, then a fiber, and lastly, your starch of any sort, so that you are trying to basically tell the body, no, glucose comes last, right? If you're trying to support insulin resistance, I always try to talk about, yes, protein forward meals, but also getting up and moving after your meals. Obviously, I grew up in Italy my whole life, so I'm very accustomed to walking around after you eat. Like you would walk through the piazza, you would walk to your house. I mean, it was obviously a different community and upbringing in that light. But I feel like here we're letting our hustle and bustle of our life, as we expressed previously, the cortisol dysregulation of life, take away like what really matters. Like go outside for a walk after you eat, connect with nature, breathe fresh air. That's going to help your body understand that like we're safe. We can digest this food. Ooh, how lucky are we, right? Resistance training. So as we expressed previously, we don't want to be doing a lot of high intensity interval training, especially if we're experiencing some of these patterns that I'm discussing here today. We want to try to support the body's ability to be flexible, to be movable, but also get into fat burning. And that's really where resistance training has the highest effect because it's low impact over a long period of time. So, kind of trying to see if that's something that you can incorporate, ideally first thing in the morning when your cortisol rhythm should be at its best. But that kind of allows your body to burn up some of that glucose and get into that fat burning. And that's keeping your heart rate within the 120s to 140s for up to 30 to 60 minutes. And that can be, light weights, high reps, that can be walking, that can be biking, swimming, those are all resistance training styles. Okay. So there was also a lot of research and studies that went into the post meal walks, like I just expressed previously. And they said that 7 minutes of brisk walking after your meal can lower your postprandial glucose, AKA get that sugar burned up before your body has an opportunity to store it and create more of that insulin resistance. But blood sugar stability is truly about hormonal stability. So, your pancreas, which is an endocrine gland, a lot of people forget, they don't understand, but your pancreas has two roles. It's an exocrine as well as endocrine gland, which means it helps with your exocrine side, which is helping with digestion. It produces amylase, lipase, but then your endocrine side produces insulin. So if you're not properly digesting and processing your foods, especially your carbohydrates, that's going to influence your pancreatic function as a whole, which is then going to influence how it produces insulin and vice versa. So all my insulin deficient patients or patients that are struggling with that probably have difficulty processing and digesting. So that is a big place where I will potentially start with patients, is trying to support how they're processing and absorbing a lot of their carbohydrates and using them. So, there might be a simple apple cider vinegar before your meals. I typically recommend avoiding your teeth. So you kind of can put in a shot glass, whether you dilute it with water or use a straw, or just kind of trying to bypass your teeth so you don't ruin that enamel. But take a shot glass about 15, 20 mLs, 15 to 20 minutes before your meals. And that's going to help your body kind of start digesting, waking those juices up, getting things flowing so that when you do eat, your body's ready. And like I said, that's another way to kind of prep your system up into a rhythm, into a routine. But there are some nutraceuticals like berberine. I think berberine is getting so much jazz. Just keep in mind there are different forms of berberine. There's berberine that is more suited for insulin resistance as opposed to like the berberine HCl, which tends to have a more affinity for gut microbes, kind of gut balance and health. I mean, there is some overarching to blood sugar regulation, but berberine, you really want to look for a dihydroberberine or different forms that tend to be more highly absorbed and more specific for insulin resistance, as well as inositol. Inositol is honestly such an amazing compound because it has so many multifaceted approaches. It does help with obviously insulin resistance. It helps with ovarian health. It also helps with calming. So it has a sleep benefit. So a lot of our formulas, even our Star Walker formulas, like our stress out formula, that has GABA, that has myoinositol, that has L-theanine, and that has magnesium. And oftentimes that is a formula that many of my female patients may be listening like, Dr. Adelena, you put me on that before. I'm like, yes, because it has so many of the key pieces to try to fix a majority of these patterns that we're seeing. So our last kind of pattern is the androgen balance. And so we're going to talk about some natural approaches. Okay. So it's very important to one, understand where your system is in time. So through that functional pattern of testing, whether it's blood, whether it's saliva, we can discuss how to optimize, right? But it is important to kind of take a look of if your androgens are high. So if you're having high testosterone, high DHEA, then it is very critical for us to try to stabilize. So blood sugar stabilization and control kind of takes a higher end and a higher piece because how our body kind of utilizes those androgens is highly influenced by our insulin and then insulin resistance. So they kind of tie in together. But one simple, effective way to start reducing or balancing that testosterone, as I expressed, there's the inositol, which has some benefits as well. But spearmint herbal tea, not peppermint, spearmint. And spearmint, it helps with clearer cognition, but more so specifically, it helps reduce androgen bioavailability. So it helps, doesn't lower your testosterone, but it helps your body better clear out that testosterone instead of storing it and causing some of that hair thinning and unwanted hair growth, some of the things that we're noting. But if your testosterone is low, and as I expressed in maybe a previous series or reel that I made, but there's a difference between adrenal fatigue and low testosterone. Adrenal fatigue is almost like you don't want to get started. Then once you engage with your partner or self, you're kind of like, oh, I'm into it. You're able to climax, you feel connected, you get that rush. But low testosterone is like flatline, start, middle, end, you're just not into it. So there are instances where testosterone support is warranted. But I can't stress this enough. If you don't use it, you lose it. And I remember hearing that in that old movie. It's kind of true, okay? Because, so many women come to me and they're like, my testosterone's low. And I'm like, okay, well, how often do you have sex? And they say, no, I don't ever. I'm like, well, how do you expect these hormones, which are solely signals, to get to where they need to go if you're not asking those signals to be placed, right? So engaging in sexual practices with self or partner is very critical to trying to increase that androgen. Also, strength training. I think we've all seen that guy at the gym's like, been dropping big weights and whichever. That is a clear note sign of ways to support your testosterone through strength training. And it doesn't have to be high intensity, jumping around, getting your heart pumped. It's more so how I express it and explain it to a lot of patients is that you can't lift anything heavier than your own body. So doing body work training is very critical to supporting testosterone. And just getting enough of your nutrients. Oh my gosh, so many of us are depleted. We're not eating enough protein. We're not getting enough of those healthy fats. So realistically, if we're trying to build good quality hormones and also trying to help with recovery, which is what's testosterone's main role, then we need those fuel sources accessible. And there are instances where maybe we introduce some DHEA, which is the precursor to making testosterone. So there are some compounds and formulas that may sustain or contain DHEA to kind of help feed into testosterone without having to take hormone replacement therapy for testosterone. And that kind of seamlessly drives us into the next kind of section of our podcast series today is when do we consider hormone therapy? Are we a candidate? What is hormone replacement therapy? Well, it's very important that this is not first line, okay? And it's not something to fear. I can't stress enough that the Women's Health Initiative is something that y'all need to kind of read into and learn a little bit more about, because they're debunking a lot of those previous preconceived notions when it came to estrogen and hormone replacement therapy. Because really, the quality, the forms, the things that they were introducing back then is very different than now. We have more information, more awareness. And honestly, hormone replacement therapy can save our lives because there are other aspects of those hormones that are beneficial, whether it's bone density, mental function, muscle support. I mean, so much. So it is important to know that, we don't want to necessarily reduce, completely say, hey, you can't have hormones because they're bad, because there is a time and a place, right? So there are some individuals that might benefit more than others when it comes to hormonal replacement therapy, but it is important to really evolve far beyond the data. Okay. So, like, we need to really individually support. So, obviously, the quality of life is important, but the labs and looking at the most proper labs. So, when I support women, especially within this postmenopausal, perimenopausal, and menopausal state, we might be exploring Dutch, which is a dried urinary testing, or ZRT, salivary hormonal. We just want to get an idea instead of the blood work, which is a snapshot in time of what's circulating. We want to look more clearly and closely at the balance amongst those hormones, but how the body's excreting some of those hormones down those more safer patterns. Okay. So, really trying to highlight when is it important, who would benefit most. So, I do think that a lot of our women that maybe have surgically induced menopause, whether they have been, you know, given prescriptives to put them into menopause, or have had partial or total hysterectomies, those type factors, because there's not that tissue type. So the body might have a lesser availability, but also it's almost like, it happens so fast. At least with us women, we ease into it. But when there's a procedure that might be associated with that, it kind of like the body's like, one day I had a uterus, the next day I didn't. That's a big shift, right? So sometimes easing that transition with some hormonal replacement can be helpful. But as we discussed, there are benefits for these hormones, especially like progesterone. Oh my gosh, I can't tell you how many women get overlooked, especially if they've had partial hysterectomies or total hysterectomies, as like, oh, you don't have a uterus, so you don't need progesterone. So they're basically saying, you don't need an off switch. So I would beg to differ and say that progesterone is very, very important to help us relax, to help us sleep. It's kind of like, in that second trimester of pregnancy when they're like, oh, you have such a glow, you're so beautiful, and blah, blah. That's your progesterone, you guys. So why are we cutting women off at the knees and saying that you don't need progesterone? So many doctors are so quick to prescribe like a biest, which is estrogen and supportive product, okay? But they're not necessarily counteracting it with progesterone that maybe a women can take orally, topically. And so those are some of the things that we'll talk about with Daniel Lyons at our upcoming podcast. But the other side is testosterone. I talked a little bit about the fact that I don't necessarily love the idea of pellet therapy with women, solely because I think it's being given as a first line as opposed to maybe a third or fourth. So it's like, oh, take pellets. It'll help with everything. It helped my friend. You should take it. Well, there's a time and a place. If your liver, your gut, if other aspects, if you're more predisposed to clearing things down one pathway than the other, like, we have to talk safety. Like, we're not just going in blind anymore, guys. We have resources to guide these decisions so that you can feel more grounded, right? It's about safety, it's about efficacy. So why not explore those testing approaches to really give us the clearest picture? I know it's not part of mainstream medicine, and I can't tell you why, you guys. It should be, right? But we do have access to this information. So if this is an avenue that you're considering doing, do it smart, right? Do it better so that you can take a least effective dose, a lower dose that's more effective, right? And that's really what ties into our naturopathic order and therapeutic order, right? Is less is more, right? I want your body to be able to do what maybe some other patients have to be on 200 milligrams of progesterone. What if you only have to take 100 or 20, right? Because the system it's being applied into is a lot clearer and ready and receptive to those hormones. But the other reason why I don't love pellet or testosterone replacement therapy for women as a first line is because some of us do store that testosterone. And it's almost like we'll get surges. I've done blood work on women after they've had pellets insertions, and their testosterone is equivalent to a male's. That's not good. Never in our menstrual cycle do we ever get to that level. So it's almost like we're kind of giving our body a surplus, and then we store it. and then we're giving vascular issues. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So that's why I can't advocate enough. Learn about your body. Don't live in fear. Hormone replacement is great, can be very beneficial. It's just when, how, and like who, right? All the W's. So realistically, I want to talk a little bit about a couple cases and patients that I've worked with. So I had a 45-year-old female. She was coming in with anxiety, weight gain, poor sleep. And it was clear that she was potentially struggling from progesterone deficiency and maybe some cortisol dysregulation. So we started with trying to get her some sleep, right? We said, okay, let's kind of calm the body. And we talked about lifestyle things such as, deep breathing and more core stability, factors like that. And then we talked a lot about diet, okay, eating more frequently, eating, smart. So trying to introduce the foods at the right time. We talked about seed cycling, those type strategies. But then we kind of dived into the supplementation. So we kind of have to calm the nervous system first, so more magnesium and GABA and things like that in the evening, but then trying to build that beneficial adrenal sources, whether it's adaptogenic herbs kind of in the morning to get the body a little bit more up and going. And as I expressed, I mean, it's so beautiful to start seeing people make connection through the labs and be able to kind of associate themselves with a specific pattern and kind of create a realistic plan because we want to start that least invasive. And then, if by chance we're not seeing shifts within the labs or symptomatic relief in the months to come, that's when we talk about hormone replacement or other strategies and tools that are a little bit more invasive. So I just can't like stress enough how blessed and I am to be able to have this platform and advocate for us women and really empower us through awareness. Like hormones are responsive. Like literally it's a reflection of your body, how they're talking, right? It's not a broken system. And we really want to start looking at patterns. I love when Barbie talks about how I explore labs. She'll be like, Dr. Adelena, I can see something on one page that's connected to the other thing on the other page. And I'm always like, you're so funny, but it's so true. That's literally what I'm after. It's not a simple diagnosis. Oh, it's this. It's like, no, like, why is this happening? And really diving into the fact that lifestyle is so therapeutic. It's not just take the supplement. And that's what I make so abundantly clear to all my patients is I'm not here to supplement your problems. I'm here to help your body through the patterns of maybe what it's experiencing right now. And so much of it, you have to have that awareness of like what's happening around you and why is my hormones falling into these patterns. So your body isn't failing you. It's asking for a new level of support. And I think that's so beautiful. I think that that's so great. It's kind of exciting. It's exhilarating. I almost feel like, women were only meant to make babies. And so after we're done making babies, it's like, put them to dust, right? It's like, no, this is the next season of our lives. And instead of, stopping and just saying, okay, let's coast through it. It's almost like, all right, we did our childbearing years and this is how it went. Boom, bam. Next one. Right? We are a different breed than those men and not to discredit them. They're great. They also go through their own stages of andropause, which is their hormones start to lessen as well. And that's that, we associate it with midlife crisis where they, you know, get a Corvette and do all, get a girlfriend, all those things. They say that, but it's funny because it's true. I mean, we see it as we've all seen it in our, whether it's movies or in our personal lives, et cetera. So and even men shouldn't be jumping to TRT as an initial supportive tool because there are other aspects within their profile that could be contributing to their andropause or their inability to use and create testosterone like they once did. So I really think that it's so important for us to discuss the patterns, right? But also discuss how do we support. So we don't want to go into that supplement rabbit hole. We really want to try to support the mechanism, the symptoms, the strategies. So, I'm just grateful that I have this platform to connect to all of you and talk a little bit about all of our health and benefits and, the things that maybe are oftentimes overlooked when it comes to hormones, right? So thanks for tuning in to The Third Opinion, where we believe your health deserves more than just one perspective. So if you learned something today that could help you on your health journey, or maybe help someone else, maybe you can share it, like it, and even subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you're ready to take the next step, don't forget you can schedule a free 30-minute consultation with myself, the naturopathic doctor here at Full Circle Health, to explore your health goals and really get personalized guidance. So until next time, keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep taking steps towards better health.